Hi, I'm Nate Charles of Charles International Law. This year, instead of asking for birthday presents, I'm asking you to support the National Immigration Law Center. I don't make that request lightly, and I don't make it simply because I'm an immigration attorney. I make it because I've come to believe that defending the rights of immigrants is fundamentally defending the Constitution of the United States itself. That might sound like a strange conclusion coming from someone with my background. I began my career as a Navy SEAL. Later, I did work supporting the Department of Defense and other national security organizations in areas related to special operations. A significant part of my professional education involved studying insurgency, revolutionary violence, clandestine operations, and domestic political conflict. One of the central concepts in that field is something called asymmetric warfare. Now, that's called asymmetric because the two sides are fundamentally unequal. One side possesses overwhelming military, economic, and institutional power. The other side has comparatively little. It's lopsided. Because the weaker side cannot defeat the stronger side conventionally, the conflict becomes political. It becomes a contest for legitimacy, for the hearts and minds of the people. Success depends less on overwhelming your opponent militarily than on persuading ordinary people that your cause is just, and that your opponent has abandoned the principles that it claims to represent. Years later, my career took a very unexpected turn. I spent about a year as a domestic violence prosecutor in downtown Washington, D.C., and eventually I ended up teaching a criminology course on domestic violence at American University. You might imagine my surprise when I realized that through studying domestic violence, and particularly the cycle of abuse, I was seeing many of the same social dynamics that I had spent years studying as a special operator and as a national security professional. Domestic violence isn't about anger. It's about power, and it's about control. It frequently involves someone in a position of greater physical or financial strength exploiting that imbalance to satisfy their own desires while convincing themselves that their conduct is justified. While the circumstances may be obviously different, the underlying human dynamic is identical. Whether I was studying insurgencies overseas or prosecuting domestic violence at home, I kept encountering the same pattern. People with overwhelming power convincing themselves that those with far less power somehow deserve to have fewer rights, fewer protections, and less fundamental dignity. That isn't strength. Ultimately, it's cowardice. And once I began practicing immigration law, I saw those same dynamics all over again. The government possesses virtually unlimited resources compared to the individual immigrant standing before it. The Constitution exists precisely because our founders understood that power cannot be trusted to restrain itself. The stronger party is the one that bears the greatest responsibility to exercise restraint. I am far from the first person to notice this. Shortly after World War II, the philosopher Hannah Arendt devoted much of her life's work to understanding how ordinary societies become capable of extraordinary injustice, like the Holocaust. She observed that authoritarian movements rarely begin by targeting the strongest members of society. In fact, almost never. They begin with those who occupy the weakest political position. The people with the fewest allies, the people with the least amount of institutional power, the people with the scantest ability to defend themselves. Those people become convenient scapegoats. They're blamed for problems they didn't create. They're portrayed as threats out of all proportion to reality. And because they're politically weak, many people convince themselves that suspending legal protections is acceptable. Just this once, just for this group. But history is replete with examples of where that road leads. Constitutional rights are never truly tested when they're protecting people everyone likes. They're tested when they're protecting people who are unpopular, people who are politically powerless, people whom society has decided are easy to ignore. The more I've thought about this, and the more that I've seen in the world, the more I've come to believe that one of the central questions of American history has always been this: how do we constrain power? That might be the fundamental question that runs through everything. The Constitution was supposed to be an answer to that power. The Bill of Rights, in particular, was supposed to be an answer to that power. Due process, equal protection, freedom of speech, and independent judiciary, checks and balances. None of those principles exist because the framers believed government would always act wisely. They exist because they understood something timeless. Humans are fallible, and power must be restrained. In fact, it's one of the reasons that we celebrate George Washington as the father of our country. It's not simply that he won the Revolutionary War. It's not merely that he was successful on the battlefield. We celebrate George Washington because after winning it all, he gave it all up. After serving 2 terms as president, he voluntarily stepped away from office. He did so in a room at the Maryland State House, just a couple hundred meters from where I went to school at the Naval Academy. King George reportedly remarked that if Washington truly relinquished power voluntarily, he will be the greatest man in the world. And he was. Washington understood something profound. The greatness of a republic isn't measured by the power it can accumulate. It's measured by its willingness to restrain its own power. That is the conundrum at the heart of the American experiment. That is what makes our constitutional government different. I am seriously concerned that we've forgotten that lesson. The overwhelming majority of the immigrants I represent are not criminals. They're parents, they're workers, they're students, they're entrepreneurs. They're people who simply want the opportunity to live peacefully, provide for their families, and contribute to their communities. And in pursuit of those laudable goals, they have become politically convenient targets for cowards. When we decide that constitutional protections no longer apply because the people affected are politically weak, we are not merely changing immigration policy. We are changing who we are. The Constitution does not exist to protect the popular. In fact, it is specifically designed to promote the interests of the minority. Simultaneously, it is designed to protect everyone, especially those who lack the power to protect themselves. So this year, I'm asking for something different for my birthday. I'm asking you to support the National Immigration Law Center. I'm asking you to do so because I believe defending the rights of immigrants is defending the Constitution. I'm asking you to support this organization as an act of principled defiance. Defiance against the idea that power alone makes one great. Defiance against the idea that power alone makes one right. Defiance against the idea that vulnerable people can be stripped of their rights simply because they lack the political strength to defend themselves. Defiance against fear. Defiance against scapegoating. Defiance against the temptation to abandon our constitutional principles when they're needed most. And defiance against cowardice. I'm asking you to stand beside people whose voices are too often drowned out by those with bigger platforms and louder voices. I'm asking you to affirm that the measure of a constitutional republic is not how it treats the powerful, but how faithfully it protects the powerless. That's the country I swore to defend. That's the country I still believe in. And it's the country I hope we'll continue building together. If you share that vision, I would be honored if you would celebrate my birthday by making a donation to the National Immigration Law Center. Thank you for listening. Thank you for standing up for the Constitution. And thank you for helping defend those who cannot defend themselves.